The primary objective of this thesis is to identify the characteristics of rhetoric and eloquence, their historical path, and explaining the true meaning that is still confused with a range of different meanings and judgments that over the years have obscured their peculiar qualities. Rhetoric is the great discipline that studies language and its use, associated with the persuasive power of the word. The cradle of rhetoric soon moved from Sicily to Magna Graecia. There are several philosophical personalities that dealt with this discipline, including the founding fathers of the Sophism, Protagoras and Gorgias, who found it crucial to transform a text concise or abundant according on the needs and not on the objective reality of the treated subject. Plato opposed the Sophism with his own view of rhetoric. To these, he distinguished a good rhetoric, which could be useful in rooting to the knowledge of good without deceit. Among his notorious scholars, there is Aristotle, who immediately recognized a close link between rhetoric and politics, as the greatest Latin rhetorician Marco Tullius Cicero, who in his Rhetoric trilogy codified some of the basic rules still valid today. However, over the centuries, the places, protagonists, and the ways of speaking in public have changed. As far as the Italian oratory is concerned, I have decided to analyze two political figures that have indelibly marked our history into different periods, but with linguistic similarities. On the one hand, there's Benito Mussolini, who during the fastest 20 years imposed the cult of his person by implementing a new epic. The Mussolinian oratory represents a field which has hardly been analyzed in the wide history of fascism. First, Mussolini's linguistic code leveraged the principles dictated by Gustave Le Bon's work of 1895, The Crowd, a study of the popular mind, a work that identifies peculiar characters and proposes techniques suitable for guiding and controlling the masses. Mussolini, after having meticulously examined it, abandoned the language of the classical literary tradition for using rural terms by creating a precise and effective language for persuading the audience, convincing it, and inciting it to war. With his eloquence, he managed to eat the popular thoughts, thanks also to the communicative environment. The speeches of the Duce, in fact, always took place in the squares for a more lively contact with the masses, centralizing the head state by making himself a religious and divine image. Today, in the world of political rhetoric, Silvio Berlusconi has soon given a glimpse of novelty, transferring the language of his business world to politics, until then far from the latter. Like Mussolini, according to many linguists, its syntactic clarity hides dangerous operations of mystification, in which foreign terms abounding giving him an international thickness and cosmopolitan appeal. In addition, a recent study has analyzed that the former premiere is a language aimed at infantilizing the public with a metaphor football and at conquering the affection of the people instead of pushing it to make choices by reasoning. Such a lexicon, more than any other, calls for pathetic and elemental emotions, that these are factors that, appropriately manipulated with judicious use of rhetoric, representing the foundation and legitimation of totalitarian regimes. Although English is criticized for being not too long-winded and for its particularly concise syntax, the history of English rhetoric shows that the most great orators, both modern and contemporary, are British and American. That is why I have analyzed 4 of its representatives. I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears and sweat. Winston Churchill represented a political figure with extraordinary oratory skills. His talents for the speeches and his charisma have been shown by many historians as the most important elements that contributed to keeping the UK in war against Germany during World War II. The British Prime Minister accurately wrote his speeches by attracting everyone's attention to Parliament. Even when his opponents were talking, Churchill had a trick to starve his gaze on himself. He lit a cigar and never dropped ashes that became longer, and in the end, all the members of the Parliament stared at him, hypnotized, to see when the ashes would fall and no longer listen to who was talking. What was flowing among his speeches was not the exaltation of his image, but a sense of creation with which he crewed English people, giving strength to resistance, awakened the courage against the bombs that fell on London. Equipped with incredible grit and extraordinary political affection, once in the field, she gave back to her fellow citizens the pride of being British, at a time when everyone was taking the sunset of Great Britain for granted. Margaret Thatcher, known as the Iron Lady, was the longest-serving British Prime Minister of the 20th century and the first woman to have been appointed. Thatcher's rhetoric had simple words and edgy concepts like steel, not too many words, straight to the point without stumbling. As American orators, I have decided to analyze 2 of the presidents, one former, the other current, of the United States of America. On November 4th, 2008, Barack Obama won the elections as the heir to Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King's political and oratory traditions. Obama's rhetoric was highly remarkable also for its human bonding, as evidenced by the speech about the life of centenarian Anne Nixon Cooper. And tonight, I think about all that she's seen throughout the century in America, the heartache and the hope, the struggle and the progress. At a time when women's voices were silenced and their hopes dismissed, She lived to see them stand up and speak out, and reach for the ballot. Yes, we can. When the bombs fell on our harbour and tyranny threatened the world, she was there to witness a generation rise to greatness and a democracy was saved. Yes, we can. As for the new president's oratory style, in choosing the topics, we find ourselves, unfortunately, in the face of the ABC of populism, whose grammar requires to convey the passions of the audience to someone to hate, an enemy. A. The proposal of a character, the orator himself, as the saviour of all the ills of the world. B. The promise of starting a new era. C. According to a research by T.U. Delph, this is a deliberately simple language, cut down to the bone, which in turn is necessary to convey an equally simplified worldview. As far as the French is concerned, I have decided to consider not only the great protagonist of the 900, but also the aforementioned writer Gustave Le Bon, who, although was not a rhetorician, with his work laid the foundations of the oratory of many dictators who had used the word as the primary weapon of the biologist's historical wars. Among them is Adolf Hitler, a vulgar but effective eloquence on the masses. Thomas Mann wrote in an anti-Nazi essay, Hitler, as an orator, probably had several shortcomings, but it all disappeared before the threatening fury that the only sound of his voice could be aroused in those who listened. Scientific studies have shown that while 200 vibrations per minute are a rate of frequency indicating a state of anger, in a phrase typical of the Führer, the frequency reached the limit of 228. In a climate full of hostility, on June 1st, 1958, General Charles de Gaulle was involved to restore the situation. On his visit to Algeria on June 4th, the president turned to all the locals with a compelling as well as intentionally ambiguous appeal, declaring, "Je vous ai compris, I understand you." In addition to its historical significance, this discourse provides an excellent example of some basic techniques of oratory art, since the French general's distinctive trait is not due to a sparkling syntax or a particularly articulated gesture, but to the credibility of his words, which allowed de Gaulle to affirm his character throughout his class. An example that brings us to a phenomenon that is becoming increasingly important in the modern era, the neo-rhetoric of the current present, better known as public speaking. The optimal value of public speaking is achieved with appropriate techniques to make one's own eloquence involving giving importance not only to the verbal aspect, but also and above all to factors such as body language and empathy for the other. Public speaking should be a school subject everywhere, since communication poverty translates into the poverty of intelligence, into painful emotional suffocation. When, for social reasons, there are no adequate linguistic tools, there is no control over one's own reality and on oneself. People who lack words to express their feelings of sadness or frustration have only one way to free them: physical violence. In cognitive science, this phenomenon is called hypercognition, a concept elaborated in the 1950s by anthropologist Robert Levy. For many centuries, rhetoric has been used as a weapon that has given rise to so many historical catastrophes, and its power still arouses a mixture of admiration and fear. And it is therefore right to condemn a rhetorician when does nothing more than deploy his techniques futilely. Instead, he must be praised when he uses its art on the service of the truth. Today, as at the dawn of civilization, this discipline can represent a mean of consolidating the power of reasoning and a mental independence, to no longer be victim of the mystifications of reality, and, above all, the sense of respect, fairness and honesty that every person should feel one another, with the hope that all of us and future generations can learn to use the most powerful and elegant weapon on earth, the glue that holds people together, the basis of relationships in everywhere, the word.